this is going to be another run through the new LXD release. We tagged LXD 4.15 yesterday evening and got the release announcement out just a few minutes ago. This is a reasonably busy release. We've got quite a few features in this one. Quite a few I'm excited to go through with you, and yeah, we'll see how that goes. Just worth noting, I changed my recording setup a tiny bit, so I'm now running fully on Wayland with the new OBS build that supports Wayland, so we'll see how that goes. Hopefully it's not gonna be much in the way of like frame drops or anything problematic. So far everything is good, but since like past experience has showed that doing streaming at the same time as like showing virtual machines and stuff can be a bit taxing, so we'll see how that goes. Alright, so the new features in LXD 4.15, that includes, and I guess the headline feature really, is the support for network interface hot plug in virtual machines. We've had that in containers pretty much forever, but virtual machines are a bit trickier given it's a full virtual machine, not just a container that you can easily inject and remove interfaces into or out of. So what that does is now we've got 4 pre-allocated PCI addresses that we can hot plug stuff into, and that should let us inject additional network devices or remove network devices from running virtual machines. Then we've got something that's been requested a few times. A few releases ago, LXD decided to be pretty, well, try to be accommodating when shutting down. So in the past, when LXD would be restarting or shutting down for some reason, it would just kill everything that's running. It would just disconnect everyone, close all of the exec sessions, everything. That was a bit problematic because you don't always control when LXD is going to restart, and you don't usually enjoy when your LXC exec session just decides to die on you because LXD is restarting. So the compromise we made before was that LXD would cancel everything it can and then would wait up to 5 minutes for everything else to complete before it goes and still restarts. It's now a bit more flexible because we've got a config key that lets you control exactly that. In LXD 4.14, we also introduced the concept of a warnings API that lets you see all the warnings that are going on the system. And initially we just had one warning that was related to C groups. We've now added a few more, and we will keep doing that as we go forward. We've added this way for figuring out what machine a given instance is running on from within the instance when you're using clustering. Also extended and reworked the CLI a bit around the trust list, so accessing the LXD trust store, listing all of the clients and servers that are trusted. We've also made a few changes to clustering so that you can now figure out whether what machines are the primary database servers and which machines are standbys, so still get some database content but are not the ones actually performing all of the operations. LXC Monitor got a few changes too. We now support a short version of the lifecycle events, and we also support tracking the requester of a given item within the lifecycle API. We've added a new expire flag to LXC Publish so that you can directly set an expiry on the resulting image without having to go and modify metadata ahead of time or modify the image afterwards. There's also support now for having HA proxy in front of LXD by supporting having config option for a list of trusted proxies. And if a connection comes from those, then it will trust that proxy to provide the correct IP address of the client. And lastly, we finally finished moving everything to Swagger for the REST API documentation and have deprecated the old one. So that's the main features in 4.15, sorry. I'm not gonna go through some of those and kind of do some demos. So the first one I've not actually tried yet. So I think I tried all of the others, but this one I haven't yet. So that's the network hot plug feature. So wish me luck because I've not actually seen it work yet. So I'm just gonna be starting a virtual machine. That's where hopefully my laptop won't melt itself. Can hear it for sure, but I'm hoping that the CPU is behaving. Looks like it is. Let's give it a few seconds and then get in there. It's probably still booting. Yeah. Usually my laptop goes quiet once it's finally booted. Okay. All right. So that's a virtual machine. We've got one network interface. I don't actually have ifconfig, so you're gonna have to do with IP-link. Should see that it has, yeah, it's got an IP address, so it's ENP580. Now, if we go look at the config for that VM, we see it's got that F0 device here. Now, let's see what happens if we add another one. So it's group 2, let's call it F1, it's a NIC. Well, let's do the exact same thing. So NIC type bridged, parent, LXD, BR0, name, F1. Oops, let's see, oops, I forgot the device. It's device side. Alright, oh, it was pretty uneventful. Let's see if it actually worked inside. Yep, it did. So we now have an EMP6X0 here, which is linked down because nothing in the VM knows about it yet, really, but yeah, it just showed up. And if we look at the kernel message output, we see here that there was a PCIe event that resulted in some reconfiguration and a new device showing up, and that device then got renamed. So yeah, that seems to be working just fine. Now the same should be true with removing it. So I can do cgroup2 if1. This is taking a tiny bit of time, so let's see what happens. Okay, now what happened inside the VM? Yeah, okay, the interface is gone, and the message now shows, okay, another event. Doesn't really give us a ton of detail, but the device is gone, so that worked. And all of this is kind of tricky, obviously, because that relies on PCI hard plug and hard remove, which is not something you do on physical machines all that often. So it's always a bit interesting to see it work quite that well. This might vary based on your guest. Like, I don't know if network interface hard plug and hard remove is going to work just as well if you're running on Windows, for example, or if you're running some other operating system in there. But in this case, it's Ubuntu 20.04 running in the VM, and it seems to quite like it. There's no issue whatsoever. So that's network interface hard plug and hard remove inside virtual machines. That was the first feature on our list. Now, the second thing on there was the configurable shutdown timeout. This is not going to be really something I can demo, just because the default would be 5 minutes, and I don't think you all want to stare at my screen for 5 minutes. But basically the way that works is we can just do this and set it to say 1, and it would wait 1 minute, or 10, and it would wait 10 minutes. So it's pretty straightforward as far as to configure it, and you kind of need to pick the best value for you. Some folks who are running environments where they want updates to apply very quickly and they don't really care about existing exec session because for like maybe their API just auto reconnects or something like that, then those will want a very small value. I expect 0 should work fine, but possibly wait a minute to just give a chance for any kind of image update or that kind of stuff to complete. And those that absolutely want their exec sessions to never be interrupted, you might be able to bump that to 30 minutes or an hour or something like that, so that LXD will wait a lot longer before it actually restarts. The next feature is also going to be a slightly tricky one to show, I think, because I would need the warning to actually be present in my system, which it's not. But basically, LXD warning list that shows you the current warnings on the system. In this case, it's showing the cgroup block IO, which I think shows up on pretty much everyone's system at this point. You can see it got acknowledged before, but there was like a difference in location. So okay, I can just acknowledge it again. There we go. Or I guess more interestingly, if I switch to a remote cluster instead of my local machine. Does this one have anything? No, it does not. What does all show? Okay. Oh, that's because I'm probably in a project. Only the default project, only users who are trusted to access the default project can see warnings at this stage. So that could be the difference. Yeah, it is. So in this case, we can see it's a 3 nodes cluster. Each of them had that block IO wait warning. All of them have been acknowledged. But that's what we had in the previous release. Even time running 4.15 here, I don't have any system that's got a current time skew or missing AppArmor support or broken VOTA-UFS support, which are the 3 new warning categories we added. But if you're on a system with such an issue, then it's going to show up in the list of warnings. The feature after that is support for the location field inside of the guest. So I can do it in 2 different places. The first one would be accessing a container. So this is not a VM, it's just a container. And I can do curl on dev LXD sock, query the /1.0 endpoint, and then extract the location field. And that tells me what machine this instance is running on. We can confirm that by checking for the instance itself in list. Come on. Not sure why list is that slow today. That's odd. I mean, here's a remote cluster, but shouldn't be particularly slow. Huh. Okay. Alright, so that works. Okay, it was just an issue getting the state, I guess. So if I just query the name and location, it does confirm that this lines up. The other one I can show is within the virtual machine. So this time it's a full virtual machine. It's not a container. The way you can actually tell that easily is by looking at the IO ports. If you've got those in there, then you're definitely inside the LXD VM, not in a container. That one does not have curl, so I need to do it old school with netcat instead. But same idea, I can query /1.0, it needs to be HTTP 1.1, and HTTP 1.1 requires a host, so let's call it LXD. And here we go. So we get the response from the dev LXD API, which again tells us it's on the host called Abydos. The main purpose for this particular feature is if you're running a bunch of instances and inside those instances you're running something else that's doing some kind of clustering. So if you're running, I don't know, could be Ceph, could be Kubernetes, could be something like that. Those platforms will like to know whether they're all run, like what the host is. The reason for that being that they want to, at their own clustering layer, be resilient for one of the backing hosts going down. So if you're running 5 different virtual machines on 3 different hosts, you don't want the majority of your cluster to somehow end up on one physical machine. Exposing that information gives a good hint that can be passed on to the software running inside the instance to properly spread and manage their role so that a physical machine going down will not take out the actual workload. Alrighty, the next one we've got is changes to the CLI. So that's just an improvement to trust list. In 4.14, we made a change to clustering so that every single server would get its own certificate, making it easy to revoke access for a particular server when it's kicked out of the cluster and just prevent any further access to the database and API. So that's what we can see here. In the catch we had with prior to this change in 4.15 was that the type and name columns, so the first 2 here, did not exist. And so you would just see common name, fingerprint, issue date, expiry date, but you wouldn't know whether a certificate was a server one or client one. And you didn't have access to the potentially nicer name that you can configure through the name field. So we've added that now. Actually, something else that was added, but that's not mentioned in the release announcement because it was too minor, is there's a new flag to trust add, so you can directly pass an alternative name for certificate. So when when adding a certificate through LXD config just add, you can now do -- name and give it whatever name you want, and that's what shows up here in that name column. The next one is something I don't think I can demo right now because I don't have any cluster that's large enough and runs on 415 yet. But basically, if you do cluster list, you usually see all your servers, and then in the database column, you see yes if the server is acting as a database node. This, in the past, would only show yes if the server was an active voter, so one of the 3 servers that actively processes queries and can be turned into the primary database server at any time. LXD cluster actually has additional roles. So when you've got a cluster of 5 machines, 3 of them will be effectively voting database servers. 2 of them will be non-voting, as in just standby database servers. Those 2 will still get all of the database. Every time something changes, they will get those transactions, but they don't block any write because we already have a quorum of machines that have it written to disk. The reason for that is so if you do like a rolling reboot or if you lose some machines, the standbys can be promoted to voters extremely quickly without needing to transfer any data effectively. So in the past, those standby machines would not be showed as running the database. We've changed that. So now if I had another 2 machines in there, they would still show database to set to yes, and only when you get to 6 machines or more will you have some that say no. The way you can tell whether they're actually standby or full on database servers is by doing cluster show. So in my case, they will all show database here. But if I had some standbys, it would show database -- standby in the roles. So that's a tiny bit of extra information being exposed that can help just figure out what's happening exactly within your cluster. Now we're moving on to lifecycle. So let me switch back to local, I guess. Not sure if we've got. I don't actually remember exactly what lifecycle events we have and whether I can just do a demo, an easy demo by using them. Maybe I can. Let's see. So let's switch to the LXC project and then do monitor type lifecycle and exec into a shell. Does that cause a lifecycle event? Come on. I mean, it's the same container that was struggling earlier, so I probably should have picked something else. Anyway, yeah, so it does not. Okay, since those are production servers, I'm not gonna start restarting them and stuff, so I'm just gonna be switching to local instead. All right, let's try doing that again. So now I'm on my local system, and let's restart that redoc container. All right, so what we see now in there are a few more things. Location and action, all that stuff used to be there already, but the requester is new. So now it tells you that the request came through the Unix API instead of the REST API, instead of the TLS listener. And when it comes over Unix API, it tells you what the username of the person talking to LXD was. So if I do it as root instead, it should log that it came from root instead. So that can be quite useful to just figure out, you know, who did what. If you're doing it over the network, so using TLS, then it will show you the fingerprint of the certificate that performed the action. And if you are using Candid or Canonical RBAC, then it shows you the username through that external authentication system. The other thing that was added is the pretty flag now works fine with lifecycle. So I can do this, and if well, let's still do it as root, why not? If I restart this this instance, we are getting a 1-line output, which is quite similar to what we do for logging, for example, which also does 1 line for everything, except that logging is a bit verbose. So So that can make it pretty easy to get a nice stream of reconfiguration or startup, shutdown, restart events without having the entire struct be printed every time. The other thing we've added now is the ability to publish instances with an expiry date. So just start an easy one. Okay. So it works, publish will expire if stopped, so might as well just stop it. Come on. Okay. So if we look at this, we now have a expire option here. It says that it needs an RFC 3339 date timestamp, which I don't remember exactly what the format is of that thing. So let's just get an example instead. I think those should show somewhere. Oh, I guess info will have those timestamps, hopefully. Yep. Okay. So let's try that. Expire, and we want. Let's say we want it to expire in about 2 hours. And let's call it blah. Okay, good. So it actually gives us the example for the format. All right, so we've got slightly different formats, but thankfully the error actually clarifies it. So month, date, T is 2000. That should work. No, does it actually want the entire thing? That's a bit frustrating if it does. Or does it just need the seconds and then the time zone is optional? No. Okay. Alright. Mostly lack of familiarity with that particular timestamp format. But yeah, that worked. And now the image, if we go look at it, I called it blah for simplicity. It does have the expiry set on it. So that's working just fine. And that saves you, so in the past you could have done that by doing config metadata show a1. Yeah, so you could have gone and then edited the metadata, the image metadata that's part of the instance. And then change here the Unix epoch timestamp manually to the expiry you want and then publish from there. But that was a bit annoying. This is going to be a bit more flexible. Should be also easier for scripting. Except you have to get used to the particular timestamp. Then the next one is going to be also slightly tricky to show. I mean, I'm using it, so I can show that it works, but it's not trivial to demo. It actually functions as it's intended. So in that cluster, the new features effectively we support HA proxy and the HA proxy protocol specifically, so that when you use HA proxy in front of the LXD API, you can have HA proxy pass in the IP address of the client over to LXD, and LXD will then log that particular address in log messages and audit logs and that kind of stuff. The way you configure that is by setting a config key here called core HTTPS trusted proxies. In my case, it's a list of 3 HA proxy servers that I have. So those 3, and then when I access LXD over the network, my remote here for this one is right here and accesses that cluster of HA proxy, which then send me to one of the 3 machines in my cluster. So it sends me to one of those 3. In the past, what would happen was if I was to look at the logs, so if I was to look at the logs and then do some kind of query, the IP address that would be logged in here would always be the one of the 3 HA proxies. I would never know who made the actual query, and I would have needed to go look at the logs within HA proxy to figure it out. Whereas now, HA proxy sets the header properly, and this is the IP address of my own machine. So if we look there, we can see that's the IPv6 address of my laptop. So this is really convenient. That's also gonna help quite a bit with anyone who needs to maintain like a full log for audit purposes, because now you're gonna get the username, the protocol, and the IP address for pretty much every single query that goes through LXD. That makes things quite a bit easier to deal with. And one last thing, so moving back to the web browser, I think I mentioned it for the past few LXD releases, that's us moving our REST API documentation over to be automatically generated from the code using Swagger, which is effectively the predecessor of OpenAPI. OpenAPI is 3.0, is the current standard. Swagger is effectively 2.0, but there's no great OpenAPI implementation in Go yet, so we're using Swagger. Anyway, we finished converting everything over to it. That means that our documentation, if we go in the normal LXD docs here, and we load the REST API documentation, which is down here. Instead of documenting everything like it used to be, now the API structure part says that it's auto-generated through Swagger. There is a YAML file that you can go look at, which doesn't work from the website. It's you need to go look in the repo for that one. So yeah, if you want to use your own Swagger GUI tool, you can go get that file, which contains all of the documentation of the API. But for most people, they would just want to go on the web rendering link, which then loads the entire API documentation. So the last few things that were added were, I think, instances got fully supported in 4.14. And then what was mostly left for 4.15 was all of the storage bits. So we've got all of those in now. And you can go and click on things and see what needs to be sent out, what kind of responses you're going to be getting. Also, I guess if we take a slightly more complex one, maybe this guy. More inputs that you can pass, what kind of content type, all of that stuff. I'm sure we made some mistakes. That was a lot of API endpoints to go and document effectively, like adding extra metadata within our code to generate this. There are probably some headers, some content types, some things we forgot here and there. Hopefully, now it's going to be a lot easier for us to go and fix and also handle fixing like bad patterns throughout the entire documentation when needed, instead of having to just go and edit a single massive markdown document as we used to do. And that's it. So that's LXD 4.15. It's gonna be, well, it's currently in the in the candidate channel for Snap users. It's gonna be in the stable channel earlier next week. Usually we aim for Monday, unless we notice something went bad at some point during the weekend, at which point we'll push to Tuesday to give us a bit more time to fix things. But yeah, so far everything looks quite good. Hopefully gonna be a good release for everyone. It also, as usual, includes a lot of fixes that we've been handling over this time. We've been really focused on cluster-related fixes lately, doing a bunch of tweaks around heartbeats and fallbacks and all that kind of stuff to try and make it very solid. So there are a few more of those inside that release. So for anyone who's been using the Snap, you probably won't notice much change because we tend to backport pretty much all fixes to the current stable Snap kind of as we go to make things smoother for users, so they don't need to wait until the next LXD release to get the fixes, and then we just kind of keep the new features aside, and that's what you get when we bump to the next one. That's it. If you've got any questions about it or anything, our forum is probably the best spot for that. Maybe something worth mentioning since last time, there's been a bit of drama around Freenode and IRC and live support and that kind of stuff. So LXD has now moved over to using the Libera chat network. We've got the LXC Dev channels over there, and we've added some links directly at the top of our forum so that people can easily find us. You can click on the IRC link here, and it just asks you for a username. So it's conveniently pre-filled with just a test in my case. You can just click start, and then you end up on IRC channel after a few seconds connecting. There we go. Where you can find pretty much all of us and a bunch of our active users. So that's a good way to get immediate live support, and then for anything more complex or that might need a bunch more back and forth, then the forum is still the best place for that. All right, well, that's it now. Still hoping we get to do some live streams about things other than just new LXD releases, but the LXD team has been growing recently, and we've been onboarding some new folks. So still struggling a bit to find spare time to do more live streams and more content. But yeah, I'm hoping that's been useful for everyone, and see you in the next stream, whenever that is.